Hello and welcome. My name is Carol Carter and I'm the founder and CEO of Global Minded. We are celebrating today International Day of Women. So if you're a woman watching this, we're celebrating you and delighted that you could join us. If you're watching this afterwards, we are just really thrilled today to have some incredible women to mark this occasion. So I want to let you know that we have these events, tech equity events every month, and we moved this one, it's usually later in the month, we moved it for this event today, March 8th. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Lisa Neal-Graves. She is our Chief Change Maker at Global Minded, and she's got an incredible background. She was the former Chief Innovation Officer for the Colorado State Attorney General's Office. And as the first role of its kind in the nation, she was a trailblazer responsible for building a culture of innovation. Prior to her role with the Colorado AG, Lisa served as Vice President, General Manager of the Cloud Strategic Product Group at the Zayo Group. With more than 20 years of communications, infrastructure, cybersecurity, and data privacy expertise, as well as software as a service, other business model development, advanced technology, strategic long-range planning. Lisa has also had tenure at Intel and lived as an expat working for Intel in Shanghai. She has both a master's in computer science and engineering, as well as her JD. So welcome, Lisa, and welcome to all of you. And thank you for being here to celebrate this tremendous day. And thank you for all joining us in the audience.
Awesome. Thank you, Carol. I appreciate it. And I am thrilled to actually have on this panel with me some really dear friends, both old and new. So I'm excited. This year we are celebrating International Women's Day. And the first time that I ever celebrated it was really when I was in China. And it was such a big deal there. I thought, why don't we make a big deal here in the US? So Carol gave me that opportunity. This year, the theme of the International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge. And I couldn't think of a greater group of women that have challenged the status quo in ways that we will learn shortly. And I'm so excited about that. So as each of you, I'm going to ask you to individually introduce yourselves, but I want you to answer this question. As we choose to challenge the status quo, please tell us your story about how you've challenged traditional norms to be where you are today. What's your story? And I'll start with you, Rita.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. So let's see. So my journey really started in India. I was born and raised in Mumbai. And I was fortunate that I was actually raised in a family that was extremely broad-minded. And both my parents always encouraged me to reach my full potential. I grew up with boys. I have 4 brothers, and my parents never once made any difference between my brothers and me. So I kind of started my life thinking this is how the world is, and men or women are equal, and there is no doubt in anybody's mind. And I marched on, I gravitated towards science and technology. I got my bachelor's, I got my master's in India, that was in biotechnology. I started on my PhD. I was working at this research institute in Mumbai. And of course, along the way, I realized that, when I started out in school, there were friends with me, other women. There were women when I did my bachelor's and my master's. But as I started getting higher and higher, the proportion of women started getting smaller and smaller. Then I came to the US. I went to Iowa, and I couldn't have chosen a place that was more different than Mumbai. It was a small campus in Ames. I mean, the campus was big, but the town was small, and but I had a wonderful time in Iowa. And again, I noticed the same thing. Even in the US, there were lots of women students, but the faculty was overwhelmingly male dominated. I went to Boston. I got married. I met my husband in Iowa, who who's an Iowan. So we had, another one of those cross-cultural, cross-racial marriages. In Boston, again, East Coast, big city, we're not in the Midwest anymore. I was doing my postdoctoral research, and I once again noticed that the number of women was getting smaller. And in the faculty, especially, predominantly, overwhelmingly male. Then after that, I took a bit of a break. I had my kids, I was home, and I started realizing, I've kind of thought of myself as a strong woman, but when the children are born, it is me. I'm the primary caregiver, not my husband. And my husband and I talked about it. He's also very supportive of women's causes. We decided that we were going to share our home responsibilities equally. And so then I went to law school. I didn't go back into academic research. I went to law school. And now this is, I started my journey in early 90s, and now I'm talking 2003. And I noticed the same thing again. In law school, the faculty was overwhelmingly male. As I interviewed for law positions, once again, lots of women in administrative positions, but partner level, not many women. And even in partner level, the powerful partners were almost always male. I chose intellectual property law, where I was, again, one of the very few women. I was the first patent woman partner in my law firm. We had trademark attorney that were women partners, but not patent. So I would say that I didn't think I was particularly non-traditional when I started as a child. And as I went through my journey, I always walk into a room and I, don't find too many people looking like me. And so that's been my journey. And now, I'm here. And I want to thank you, Global Minded, for letting me be on this panel and share my journey.
Yeah, it's so funny, Rita. It's almost as if when we first met, it was me seeing you in class and thinking, oh, wait, another brown person. This is awesome. So it's really cool to go full circle and hear your story. Let's go to Olena.
Hello everyone. My name is Olena, and such inspirational story from Rita. And my story is similarly, but also different. So I grew up in China, and my family is very traditional. So ever since I was a little girl, and I constantly hear from my parents, my relatives, my friends, my teachers, all these people around me and saying, it is nice to have a daughter, have a girl in the family, but it is essential to have a son, have a boy. And I have been doing great at school, and I was, top one at school, but my teachers, they still told me like, hey, boys always have more potential than girls.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually they will surpass you. So that's how I grew up. I have to, like constantly fighting against all this bias and work really hard to prove myself. And in 2006, after I finished my bachelor in China, and I came to US, that was really bold. I decided, I want to explore the whole world and see how all other people are living their life, what is the culture and all these things. So I came to Purdue and I got my PhD in computational electromagnetics in 2011. Again, just like what Rita said, right? So the more education you get, the fewer female students or faculty members you meet, along your journey. And then in 2011, I joined Intel, and since then I have been working for Intel. Right now, I'm a chief architect and the principal engineer at Intel. I have a been focusing on the end-to-end computer system design and optimization. I have been led corporate level strategies and define the next generation PC, how we intelligently design an intelligent PC. So I'm very passionate about my work, and I largely appreciate my working environment, but still from time to time, I still encounter, the cases, scenarios, there is this, conscious or unconscious bias towards women. And when people look at me, young woman and rising up fast, and I literally got a very fast track of a career. I only joined Intel for a few years. I already got the prestigious titles and very established career. I got a lot of things, and and I have to fight against and constantly, but and fortunately I also meet a lot of supporters, and they are so good. They really help you to navigate through and help teach you methods to how to internalize a lot of the situations and become stronger, and to have more ability to lead and to to succeed. So I'm very, very glad to join this panel and learn from every wonderful woman in this panel, and share some of my stories. Thank you.
Great. Let's go with Julia.
Thank you so much, Lisa. So my story, it has a couple of different layers: being a woman, being a Black woman, and then being the child of immigrants coming from the West Indies. So, when my parents came to the US, the idea was that, hey, try to do the best that you can to make a living, because I wouldn't have the same hurdles that they had, because, starting over, my dad was a teacher in Barbados, my mom was a nurse and established, and they had to come to the US and start over with their GED, because back in the 70s, you're not bringing papers over from other places. And so they instilled in me that, hey, you can do what you want because you were born in this country, you're a citizen here, you don't have these same hurdles. So similar to Rita, thinking through, hey, I can do whatever I want. And so as I was going through my life, and when I got into college, I decided to do finance. And when all of my girlfriends, they were all going into HR or marketing or even accounting, but no one was going into finance. And I was wondering why all the staff were men, or the faculty members were men, why a lot of my classmates were men. I'm like, is there something I'm missing about being in the finance field? And then when I started my career, at JP Morgan Chase in their card services function. A lot of the people that I encountered were men. The only other woman in my group, luckily she was a director, but all of her bosses were men, and then her direct reports were men. And then I was I was like the only woman in terms of analysts. And for me, there was something that I did not understand. It's like, if we could all do the same thing, if we've all got the same skills, what is it about finance? Why is it so male dominated? And then finally I went back and I got my graduate degree. And then I entered ExxonMobil in the controller's function. And one of the things that I thought was interesting was that while there were women there, a lot of women weren't necessarily outspoken. And from the time I was a kid, one of the things that I was known for was being the one who could speak up front. I wasn't afraid of getting rejected or turned down. I would speak up. And I realized, though, being in that environment and being a Black woman, being outspoken wasn't necessarily the right thing to do or the accepted thing to do. And so that was something that I had to learn to navigate, in this space that was male dominated, oil and gas being male dominated, and then the finance within oil and gas being male dominated. How do I navigate as a woman and a woman of color? And so what I focused on doing was using those things to be my strengths, especially me being outspoken. How could I use that to forge relationships with leaders? How could I show my leadership this way? And how could I speak up on behalf of other people who may not be as fearless or as I might be? Because like I said, after a while, I wasn't afraid of saying anything because that's just how I grew up. And so now in my career, you know, I'm in the finance, I'm still in the finance space, but now we're looking at technology solutions to enhance finance. And I don't think that I would have gotten these opportunities had I not known how to navigate some of these male-dominated spaces. And then from a background perspective, my family being from the Caribbean, the idea was that, hey, you want to get a good job, get yourself settled, you know, have a stable career. But for me, I wanted more. And so that's how I ended up starting my own business, Rock Career Development, career coaching and leadership development, because I knew that if I wanted to have a greater impact on the world and especially help people and women who look like me to achieve higher career goals, I couldn't just do the status quo, go to work every day, punch a clock. Like that wasn't enough for me. And so now I'm a corpreneur, you know, in the male-dominated space in oil and gas, but then also now launching my own business. And you still find yourself struggling for resources or struggling for connections when you're a woman launching your own business. But I'm so committed to helping people and helping women achieve their career goals that it's like, hey, I'm willing to go through the battles, but you know, I'm hoping that we can continue to make progress so that we can, you know, change the conversation and secure more seats at the table for women. But thank you so much for having me here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Julia. And last but certainly never least, my dear friend, Suraya.
Hi, everyone. And Carol, thanks again for having me on the panel. Lisa, thank you. Yeah, my story is, I think like many of us, I'm also an immigrant, also first gen. I grew up in Malaysia on a farm. Actually, my parents were farmers. And my sister and I were raised never to think that we couldn't, and that we always wanted to be grateful for where we came from, but yet looking out into the future, and to bring others with us. And so, you know, and so those were kind of the values that we were raised with. I subsequently left the farm, obviously, and went to law school in the UK. And worked, much like a lot of us, internationally as an M&A attorney, and moved to the US 20 years ago, and had done M&A work, but primarily in the tech sector. So when I moved to the US, I decided, well, hey, this is my big chance to join a tech firm in the legal department and in the US, and interestingly realized that all of a sudden I was faced with bias that I never quite experienced before working internationally. And it never actually crossed my mind, because growing up on a farm, it had been, yeah, sure, you're from the farm, but you can do anything. And all of a sudden to move here and be faced with that bias, even though it was unconscious, was really revealing and really telling. I left the legal field and moved into operations and strategy, still in tech and media firms, and really felt like there, it was somewhat of a little bit more of a level playing field in terms of opportunity than it was in, I would say, a fairly conservative view in the legal world. But all of a sudden I was faced with new biases, and that operations and strategy is primarily a male-dominated field. And so we had, I would say, bias upon bias upon bias of a person from another color, a person from another country, a person of color, a woman in a male-dominated field. And all these different layers were just fairly new to me. And so I branched out 2 years ago and started my own firm as a fractional COO. And yet again, I think that was another example of challenging the status quo, if you will. A fractional chief operating officer, again, is a male-dominated field. A woman of color entrepreneur, I would say there are probably a handful of us here in the Colorado market. Every day I think about that. I think about breaking barriers. I think about challenging the status quo, but I also remember, the values that I was taught, which was bring others with you along that journey.
Nice, nice. Thank you so much. You guys, all of you have had such amazing experiences, both as culturally diverse as well as professionally diverse. And as I think about your backgrounds and the roles that you sit in, you've all experienced, of course, gender inequity in many ways. And you've all talked about it a little bit, but let's break it down a little bit further. Rita, I know that you, as a woman in STEM, and then you went into the law, and then you even went into IP, right? And so those are like a triple down male effect. And when I think about that, and I think about who you are and how you show up, I was always in awe, right? Because you show up as, I know what I know, and I'm very confident in what I know, but you're not giving anybody any hell about it, right? Unless they give you hell. Talk to me about what your real experiences have been, because that's how I experience watching you from the outside looking in. But as a person going through it, what really has been your experience, and how do you stay level, right, and keep an even kill around interactions while you are still making the climbs and doing the things that many don't even have a chance of doing, right? I mean, you're a shareholder partner. That in and of itself is a quintessential high that most women don't achieve. So talk about that.
Yeah. So Lisa, I think one thing I really appreciate is the grounding that I got when I was little, right? And when I went out in the world, I didn't really expect to be treated any differently than men. And so I think, to be perfectly honest, for a long time, I was blind to biases. And I think that was almost like because it was a reality that I had kept with me so strongly, that men or women are equal. And everybody knows that, of course, right? And so if something happened, I would reach inside me and say, well, what did I do wrong? What was it? I should have done better. I should have seen this coming. Maybe I'm not communicating well. Maybe I'm not, and so I think that was my attitude. And I do think that a lot of the things that happen, especially around gender roles, much of it is, it's subtle. It happens over time. And just as I was coming out of my home, completely trusting what my parents told me, my peers, male and female, were coming from their households, always seeing, not always, but a lot of times seeing their brothers being treated a little bit differently than them. And they were coming with those attitudes. And not all of them were, closed-minded. So when I had this attitude of kind of always examining myself and how can I do better and having conversations from that perspective, I actually felt that I actually could change some of their minds. So some of it was myself, my own questions and vulnerabilities, and communicating from that point of view. I think that this message of gender equality, that at least there is a sizable population that is receptive to that. And if you show them that you're just as good as any other man, they will slowly change their mind. Now, of course, there are others where you cannot change their mind, and they are perhaps not young enough, or not flexible enough. And when you come to that point and you have done all that you can, all the self-analysis that you have done, and you come up with the conclusion that, okay, there is something, when you run out of explanations, there is only one explanation left, however, unpalatable that it might seem. And at that point, you have to confront it. And it is hard because a lot of the times the power imbalance is there. you are in a minority, and especially, you know, a woman of color and immigrant. I mean, I came here just on my own, and started it, right? But I think you have to find that courage. You have to speak up, and you will notice, as I have, that when you do that, there are actually other people who will support you. So you're not entirely alone, and don't be afraid to seek help. You know, I have been lucky enough to find supportive men also in my life, and you know, take their help, and you know, ask for help, and if you ask for help the right way, a lot of time it is coming. So my attitude has always been, try to be reasonable, try to, you know, appeal, try to explain things, but after a point you have to say the hard things, and you have to just tell yourself, I did all I could, and now I got to just speak up, and I'm ready for the consequences. And that strategy has worked for me so far.
Nice, nice. You know, I'm gonna toss this to Olena as well, because Olena, I met you shortly after you came to Intel. And you know, you hadn't been there that long before you had at least 10 patents under your belt. So you were killing the game in terms of patent prolifics, right? You were really doing some amazing things. And yet, you know, it's one of those, and yet you were still fighting to try to figure out what your footage is. Talk to me about, you know, the experiences that you had in really trying to get folks to at least acknowledge your competence, and then, you know, tie in the fact that you had your husband working there as well. We we pulled in your husband because we wanted to get you so bad. We said, well, we'll bring in Bo too, right? So,
Right.
tell me how that worked for you, and you know, to from your vantage point, how did that inequity play?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I would firstly to say thank you, Lisa. You made a huge difference on me. And I have been lucky enough, you know, to meet a lot of the supporters, mentors, and sponsors like Lisa through my journey at Intel. And so like I said, so they have been helping me to advocate and teach me how to navigate and internalize a lot of these situations and properly, you know, handle it and also help others. So for my you know, my own story or my own journey, I have always been working very, very hard, and I try to prove myself. And you know, women, uh, we deserve a seat at the table. So constantly trying to strive to that goal. And sometimes I fail. Um, you know, I tried very hard, like Rita just said, right? And I propose ideas and proposals, initiatives, and it may sometimes just taken over by a guy, you know. And sometimes when you bring up some great ideas, even in the meeting, and then you somehow people just chose to forget about it. And if another guy will pick it up and say more about it, and everyone like, hey, that's a great idea, and blah blah, right?
Mhm.
And you're like, wait a minute, I said that, right? That was my original idea. And across Intel, and we actually even had some studies, and people started to note down how many instances like that during a meeting. And we started to have, you know, to raise this awareness and have all these supporters, you know, like women or men. And hey, you know, this is the fact. There is this bias, you know, in our daily work and in every meeting and in all of these activities, and there is a gender inequality, and let's raise awareness, let's help each other out. So now, like during the meeting, if we have like situations like that, and Lisa would say, hey, I really love that idea when Olena first pointed out. So we really, really help each other. And I think, we each of us only have so much to do, so much to influence. But if we can
Mhm.
get together and help each other, and we actually have a very strong power and influence and gradually change the culture around us.
Nice. And I love that you ended with this whole notion of gradually changing the culture. So I'm going to ask Suraya, you decided that if you couldn't beat them, then you would actually create something that didn't join them, but would actually beat them at their own game anyway, right? So you created your own business around a fractional COO. Talk to me about how you will help forge gender equality, right, in the world. So as we move forward, and you're already talking about, the fact that in strategy and operations, it really should be a level playing field for all intents and purposes. But what you found is that it's not so much. So how can you, in your current role and in the work that you're currently doing, how can you help forge a world where gender equity really does exist?
Yeah, great question. I think the worst thing about inequity is that it's invisible to a large extent. The drivers for it are invisible. The results are visible, but the drivers for it are invisible. No one wants to run around admitting that they are acting inequitably. And the worst thing about how inequity starts is that it comes from a place of privilege. And most people don't want to admit that they're privileged. No one really, some people do and try to change the world and make it a better place, a more level playing field. But by and large, especially I think people who are in a position of power to influence others and drive change don't necessarily want to admit that privilege. And so I think that as leaders, and to your point, Lisa, my role, I think, as a trailblazer and a groundbreaker is to constantly challenge the norm and lead by example and create a path for others to see that it is possible to also challenge those invisible barriers, to also challenge those unconscious biases, to also raise your hand and say, well, no, wait a minute, that's coming from a place of privilege. And then I think in my role as a trailblazer, again, I look back and I help and pull along. I see myself sort of like, in a boat, if you will, and putting my hand out and pulling along other women who were like us maybe 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, who need that help, who need that guidance, who need that person, that light in front of them to help shine a light, like we've all said, on the inequities. So I think that's what I try to do in my work. I help a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, and I coach and mentor a lot of women to be able to accomplish what they want to do, but also blaze their own path.
Nice. Thank you. And Julia, I think your story actually it took me over the moon, because it was hard to break in. And so I learned, and as I learned, I teach. So not only did you learn how to get over, sort of the hump associated with these invisible barriers, you also decided that you would actually show other women and other people really how to navigate the same. Talk to me about what you plan to do, or how you work to forge a gender equal or gender equitable world as we move forward.
Sure. The biggest thing that I teach women is how to advocate for themselves. One of the things that has been helpful for me has been to speak up. So the challenges that I've had in my corporate career is that I've seen men get roles that I was suited for, and they've had less experience or just about, but I was the next in line and I had to follow up and ask questions. And that to a certain point, I was no longer afraid of losing things, because if I'm not going to be appreciated by this organization, I'm talented enough, I'm smart enough that I can take my talents elsewhere and someone will scoop me up. So what I teach women is how to advocate for themselves, how to ask for the money they want, how to ask for the roles that they want, but how to do it in such a way that doesn't necessarily put someone on edge, but how do they effectively communicate their value? That's one of the things I teach women. And then how to be willing to go the next step forward. You're going to get the first barrier of no, right? And so how do you get past that next barrier of no, or continue the conversation? And part of that comes with being confident in who you are and bring to the table, and not being afraid to walk away from situations that don't serve you. There are enough corporations and companies and organizations out there that will be happy to have the value that you bring, so you don't have to stay in a toxic environment or an environment that's really not supportive. And the next thing that I have tried to do as well is start conversations with men to understand their perspective, and also share this perspective from the women's side, because sometimes men just don't see, to Suraya's point, the privilege that's out there. They think, well, I just worked hard and I went to school and somehow I got here. And it's like, well, in theory, that sounds good, but in terms of how the institutions are set up, it was set up for your success over my success. So it's having those open dialogues about, recognizing the privilege that you have, and then in turn using that privilege to speak up for someone else, or to open the door for someone else, or to create a conversation for someone who isn't in the room. And so that's one of the other things. And then the last thing I'll mention is that I've committed to working with younger women. So I'm on the board of a young women's mentoring organization, young women of color, to try to make sure that they understand that they have the opportunity to be whatever they want to be. They don't have to stop at the roadblocks that are in front of them, whether it's environmental, society, biases, that they can push through those things. So I think if we try at every level to push the conversation forward, and also help women develop the confidence that they need to advocate for themselves, I think we're a lot closer to getting a gender equitable world.
I love that. And I particularly love, if they don't hear you when you speak, shake the dust off your feet when you leave. That's basically what you're saying. I love that. I guess the one thing that today is International Women's Day. And so I want to go back to that and just ask each of you, who are your international women role models, right? I met a woman when I was in India. We were doing a full day immersion in having breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks with different families to just understand the culture. And one of the women that I met, and it was so fortuitous that we met, but Pushpa actually became my pen pal. So from, I guess, wow, I'm thinking about that now, somewhere 2012 until now, we've been really connected and still interacting with each other. And when I was running for office, she called and said, listen, I think we can do an article on you. I don't know that is a good idea given where I live, but we'll talk about that later. But she has been sort of my role model, because she pushed through and created a business for herself out of nothing, right? Out of whole cloth. And it was a business where she would invite these groups in, and she would figure out the right mix of companies and or families to connect them to, so that you could get a real experience and not feel like it was just performative. And I loved that. I thought that was so enriching and such a great idea. For you guys, who represents that for you? I'll start with you, Rita. I'm always starting with you. You should be used to it now.
Yes. I feel like I'm back in law school, Lisa. I'm again, as you gave the example of Pushpa, I'm thinking, there have been so many inspiring women. Actually, I think everybody in this panel, right, as I'm listening to your thoughts and your stories, I think you're all inspirational to me. And, you know, starting with my own family, I had some very strong women role models who were single. One of my aunts was one of the first women to go to college. She became a math professor, and she was single and she was happy and, you know, strong woman. But I think one person that I have really found inspirational, whom I don't personally know, and so, you know, I have her on a pedestal, and she has kind of guided me from there, is Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so when you know, I just find her journey so incredible, you know, and I find some things that actually I can relate to her. You know, I went to law school when I had kids, and I studied for the law school exams. You know, my daughter, when I started, my daughter was only 2.5, and my son was like 9 months old. So managing that, and, you know, of course, I am like many years after her, but she was a true trailblazer. I mean, despite you know, being Harvard Law, and she graduated from Columbia Law, you know, on top of her class, she couldn't find anybody to hire her. She had to, one of her professors, I think, had to really push for her to get a clerkship. He threatened that judge and said, if you don't give her a clerkship, I'm not going to send any Columbia Law students to you for clerkship. So she kind of did that. But what I found inspiring is she didn't let that, she wasn't bitter, you know, she just went on and she took on gender roles, she took on those cases, she got onto the Supreme Court, and she did what she had to do without getting angry, but without losing sight of what was important. And she wrote those scathing dissents, and she, you know, really accomplished a lot. And one of the things that I find so incredibly powerful is in her interview, she said, she was asked, you know, when is it going to be enough? How many women do you want on the Supreme Court? And she said, when there are 9. And she said, when I say that, people kind of look at me shocked and so like, what? All 9? And she says, well, we've had 9 men all these years, and nobody thought anything wrong about that. And I think that that's the perspective that's kind of, you know, just turning things on their head. We are so conditioned to think that, you know, we see men right from our childhood. We see men in positions of power as faculties, as professors, as partners, business leaders, you know, and we grow up with that. We don't question it. But when somebody says, you know, why is that? Why can't we have all women? What's wrong with that if they're all qualified? And you're going to see pushback against that, because that is such a, you know, crazy out there idea. So yeah, so I think she has, you know, I find her very inspirational, especially given that, you know, the legal profession.
Great. How about you, Suraya?
Sorry, looking for my mute button. I actually wrote an article today that I published on LinkedIn about the person who is inspirational to me, and that is my grandmother. And she emigrated to Malaysia from India. Her family moved to Malaysia for more opportunity, and they moved right around, I would say 1919, 1920. Not a time when a lot of girls were receiving education. They went straight into, a few years later, World War I was just ending, then they went into World War II. She lived through a really difficult time, but yet got herself educated through, I would say, pushing herself forward and advocating for herself. And so it wasn't the norm to advocate girls, but she was always raising her hand and saying, hey, pick me. Hey, what about me? Hey, let me try this. And then later she went on to raise a family of 7 and became a pretty central figure in the community, leading community groups and church groups. So that was her career, if you will, but still maintained a base of, you know, good family values, raising a family of 7. And from her, I think I draw my inspiration. I try to, I guess, you know, stay close to home when it comes to people who inspire me, because I find that everyday heroes for me resonate more for me than other figures. And so I would say her version of advocating for yourself, of always being a leader in the community, of taking care of your family, is what I infuse my life with. And also, I think, frankly, how I infuse being a groundbreaker for equity, for creating equity. I like, Julia, what you said about, if they're not saying that woman's name, it's up to us to say that woman's name in the room. And so I think about that. I think about how my grandmother blazed a trail for all of her 7 children. And I think about that. I think the great thing about being a COO is I can say the name. And so I do say the name. I do say, hey, what about that lady? What about that girl?
Nice. So Julia.
Yeah, so it's very similar to Suraya. I focus on kind of everyday heroes. And for me, the person that inspires me the most is my mother. And it's because of how much she's had to overcome in her life. Growing up in a home where didn't have a father, her mom left early, she was raised by her grandmother, dealing with domestic abuse in the home. She ended up in an abusive marriage and having the courage to start over in a new country, just so much that she was able to overcome, and then was able to go and get her PhD while raising a family and working full time. I mean, those kinds of things, to have that depth of strength at so many different periods in your life, it was just, for me, I'm like, I don't have any excuse for not being successful after having that kind of a blueprint from my mom. And one of the things that she always told me from the time I was a child was that you don't have to depend on anyone to be successful. Yes, there may be people there that will support you, but you work hard so that you can build the skills, build your own things, so that you don't have to depend on anyone. Because that's how she was able to leave her abusive marriage and start over, was because she worked hard for herself. And so that mindset of hard work and being willing to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and not relying on someone else. So that's kind of what's been infused in me. And for just what I share with women is that, you can advocate for yourself. You can stand on your own 2 feet. Even if someone else isn't saying it for you, you can say it for yourself. And that's kind of how I translate my mom's message into kind of everyday life with my clients, my friends.
Awesome. And Olena, last but not least.
Yeah, sure. Throughout my journey, I have found a lot of women are super inspirational to me. I'll just name a few, and they came into the different stage of my journey, my life. So one of them is my PhD advisor. She actually also came from China, and she is incredibly smart and diligent, and she literally was one, has been today, I think a few years ago, she already made an IEEE fellow, and there were only a few, very, very few females can get that, honor. And especially in, our domain, it's very, very tough. And she just powered through and pushed through all the way, and to earn it. And she through my PhD years, she had always demonstrated to us and how much we as women can achieve, and independently and intelligently. And when she made the decision to come to US, that was a really, really bold decision. She already married by that time, but she convinced her husband and saying, I will earn the bread, and you just come along with me, and I will support the family, no matter how hard and all that. And she made it, and she got great supportive family. So yeah, I feel very grateful to work for her and to learn from her. She's one of them, and another one is Lisa, of course. She taught me so much, and she always like to build the community. At Intel, I live in Portland. She has always been, the center of our community and trying to unite us together and to help each other and to speak up for each other and seek out opportunities for each other. And another recent one is one of my collaborators. She is fellow at Intel. So we have been working on one project. Like I came up with one initiative proposal, and we want to make a case for the corporate level strategy. And it was quite challenging by itself, but then they kind of merged quite a few people into it. And as usual, I'm the only girl in the game, and I look young and inexperienced. So, and that was my original idea, and I had to, overcome all these challenges and a lot of this unspoken bias. And she literally spent a ton of time, and I still remember one night because she had like full agenda of the day, and she called me she said, "Hey, I'll call you at 10:30 p.m. if you are still available. We can talk through about it, and I got a few thoughts, and we can help you to improve, your ideas and proposals, and we need to make your ideas shine." And then we talked about like 1.5 hours, that's like midnight. And so she just go all the way to help others. And it's not only me, and for the people around her, and she has been helping others tremendously. They are such great role models, and I just feel very, very fortunate, and I would like to give back and help more people. And I'm constantly mentoring others, including the university students. I want to pay back, and let's do this together. Yeah. And the last one, RPG.
Okay.
Yes, she is so amazing, and she was so ahead of her
Mhm.
time, right? And wow, so incredible. Every time I read her stories, I'm like, wow, this is so powerful.
Thank you. Thank you, Olena. You're way too much. We're getting towards the end of our time. And so I want to ask each of you if you could just take a single minute to articulate what your call to action is for equity, right? What are you asking? We've got a captive audience today. So what are you asking people to do to get us to a place where we have true gender equity and we don't require the kind of wave makers that you guys are, but it doesn't hurt to have them. But how do we get there from here? And and I will start with you, Rita, as usual.
Yes. Well, first of all, Lisa, I want to, I agree with Olena. I have seen you in action, and I am not at all surprised that she chose you as a role model. My call for action is, I think that I see three distinct ways. One is, I think, as we've seen, all of us, many of us here talked about importance of family and early role models, and the reality is that not a lot of women, not a lot of young girls are seeing that. So just being visible, just bonding together, just promoting other women, and just presenting those role models, just being there, I think that is like the first step, and that is something that we can all do. So be there with your time. The second thing is mentoring those girls. So beyond, just promoting each other and being visible, give your time, actively be there. And I think that's where I'm so thankful to Global Minded that that's your mission, is to work with high school age girls. I think there are lots of studies that show that girls' confidence starts tapering off in middle school and high school, and that's when they start turning away from STEM. So if we can connect directly to those girls, I know each one of us make a commitment and say, I'm going to work with, these many girls, and that's something concrete, that's something number-based, we can work with that. And then the third part of that, I think, is helping women in workplaces. So, it's not just younger ages in mentoring, but continuing that mentoring when you're in your workplace. So when I have projects, I will try to pull a woman onto that. When I have work coming, or if I have a referral, I will reach out something that I don't do. I do patent law, and I do life sciences, pharmaceuticals, patent law. So if there is something that's engineering or some different kind of work, I can give it to a woman. And I think sometimes maybe some of us hesitate doing that, but I say just don't, if you have some if you don't know of qualified women, that's one thing, but just building a database or having, keeping those names like really in a list and going to that. And I want to actually mention, I personally benefited from a group like that. It was called CGCG, so it was Colorado General Counsel Group, and that group made it its mission to bring women and minority attorneys and connecting them with general counsels in Colorado. And they set up meetings and 3 hours at a time, and a lot of general counsels donated their time. And I made some excellent connections, not just with the GCs, but also with other participants. So we now have our own network, and we refer to each other. So I think doing, at those 3 critical points early on, high school age kids, and then working later on, I think that's what we need to do. And all of, Olena and Julia and Suraya, all of them brought up that point about, strength in numbers, right? Bonding together. I think that's where I would say we need to go.
Awesome. Thanks. And so Julia, what's your call to action?
So I think there are a few things. So I'll try my best to keep it short, but one of the main things that you can do is just for women themselves is to think about what your goals are and allow that to guide you in your workplace. So it's easy for you to feel silent or I can't speak up for myself, but remember that your goals have value and that you have value. And so allow that to help you build your confidence to start speaking up on your own behalf. But then taking that a step further, thinking about the women that are next to you. If you're in a meeting and someone got passed over and perhaps you're leading the meeting, you can make sure that, well, hey, we didn't hear Lisa's point or we didn't hear Rita's point. Let's circle back again. How can you make sure that you're speaking up for women who may not have a voice? And then asking the question. So if you've got a sponsor or a mentor, or someone who's got some senior opportunity in your organization and who may be a man, can you start conversations about not just for your own career, but looking more broadly at, I noticed that there are only a few women in this, have we not thought about recruiting more women for this? Or have we not thought about, shifting the organization so that we can have more women participate? I know that we've got a good group of women over here in X or Y. So being willing to forge those conversations with men, it can't just be us doing it ourselves. We want to band together, but if men are in the positions of power, it's important for us to forge those discussions. And then going back to Rita's point, making sure that we're not just sowing the seeds for ourselves at an adult level, but what about young women? What is it that we can do to help them to be empowered, for them to learn that they can too achieve? And so making sure that you're sowing the seeds at as early as an age as possible, so that by the time they get to college and they get to the workplace, that they already have that confidence to speak up for themselves and to push for opportunities. And then the last thing I'll just say is, and this may be a little controversial, but don't be afraid to force your way into certain spaces. That's one. Sometimes you may feel like, hey, the door is closed in my face. And sometimes I've just had to kind of muscle my way in. But the fact is, if you're able to push your way into a space, and then you can slide up a chair for another woman. That's how you get more chairs around the table. Everything can't always be sugar and spice and everything nice. Sometimes you have to have a little bit more edge, but sometimes doing it up front can allow it to be easier for the person coming behind you.
Awesome. All right, Suraya.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief as well. I think I thought of 3 things. My first thing is say her name. You know, say her name. Bring up that woman's name. She's not in the room. Say her name. Bring it up. We all have that responsibility to advocate for each other. The second thing I would say is don't be silent. If you see something, and I think this is for women and men, if you see something that's not right, raise your hand and say something about it. And it's so often, like, you know, Julia said, it's nice, it's great to be nice, but sometimes you have to raise the thing and have that uncomfortable conversation. And then the last part that I would say is lift each other up. Sometimes women we can be our own worst enemies. We're hard on ourselves, and sometimes we're hard on each other. Lift each other up. I saw a great meme the other day that said, reach out and tell a woman something nice to lift her up and brighten her day. For no reason, but I think today on International Women's Day, let's all make a pledge to do that.
Awesome. Olena, finally you. Last but not
Yeah,
least.
I cannot agree of everything everyone said. Cannot agree more on that. You know, we need to speak up for ourselves, for others, and we need to bond together and look for opportunities for all of us together, and you know, mentoring students, and also mentoring the juniors in the workspace. Yeah, all of that.
Awesome. Thank you guys so very much for joining us today. Rita, Julia, Suraya, Olena. I'm saying your names out loud because I also want to make sure that I follow up with you, because we do have a huge challenge before us. We've got a lot of young women who need mentors. And these are women who we want them to finish school. We want them to go on to do fantastic and amazing things like you each have done. And so as we frame and look forward to what Global Minded does for the community, each of you will play a significant role. And so we're grateful that you said yes today, and pray that you'll say yes tomorrow and the day after and the day after. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Thanks so much for being who you are and representing women in such wonderful ways, and just being the awesome wave makers that you are. Thanks so much. Have a fantastic day.
And Lisa, I just want to add real quick, just first a thank you to Lisa. And then also that Lisa and I are working on something we call the bold goal, to algorithmically connect 25 million first-gen students, first-gen grads, those who work with them and those who want to hire them, to role models, mentors, internships, and jobs. And we know that that work at scale cannot happen without technology breakthroughs. And Lisa's really tackling that really gnarly beast of a bold goal. And the second thing I want to say is, just coming out of really the crisis of the last year and a half, I can think of no better people to show all of us in the world who we are than women like each of you, and also people who are immigrants, who are refugees, who have done incredible things on, you know, little to no money at all. And I think those reserves and that fortitude of spirit is something that the whole world right now, in the next 6 to 8 months, like, we can all learn from women like you, and women and men who have those qualities. And we look forward here at Global Minded to sharing the stories of those people in these monthly equity events, but also in our newsletter, because that is the real grit and the gift of this horrible time of the last year, is coming out of it being as capable as each of you are. And I think, you know, millions of people can learn that and source that. So Thanks again. And Lisa, thank you for assembling this incredible group of women, and thank you for who you all are. And we look forward to working with you to create millions and millions of people who are as successful and as remarkable as each of you. So thanks so much for being here, everybody. And thanks to all of you who attended, and will have the recording and share it with everybody who signed up. Take good care. Bye. Thanks so much.
Happy International Women's